Okay, good morning. Welcome to the second class on a mini-series of Passover dedicated to the other side of the Seder. What do I mean by the other side? The Seder is a long, drawn-out ritual. There are actually 15 stages of the Seder, but the Seder could be divided into two segments. There's up until the meal, and from the end of the meal to the end of the Seder. And they're not just two different sections broken up by the meal, but they're two different dimensions of what the Seder is all about. The word Seder itself means order. It's strange for Jews to have a ritual called order when we're always late and we're always disorganized. It reminds me of a rabbi I knew who was trying to get a minyan together for Yom Kippur. And he was calling people to get them to commit themselves to participating. And then he's speaking to one man who said he would come. So the rabbi says, "What about your son, your teenage son? Would he come?" And he hears the kid saying, "I don't believe in organized religion." So the rabbi says, "Tell your son that if I have to call people right before Yom Kippur to get a minyan together, this is disorganized religion." But on Pesach, we make an exception and we're very organized. Everything is done in a very methodical way. And that methodology subjects us to two different dimensions of the Seder. The whole idea of the Seder is not just to tell a story, but to relive the experience of bondage and freedom. So we do things that remind us of the slavery. In the recitation of the Haggadah, we talk about the slavery. We also eat the bitter herbs. That reminds us of the bitterness. The Matzah also reminds us of both, actually. Matzah reminds us of what we did in Egypt, the impoverishment. Matzah is called bread of affliction, impoverished bread. And we also drink 4 cups of wine to remind us of the redemption. So there's like this balance over here between remembering the bondage, the slavery, and remembering the exodus, the freedom. And we alternate from one to the other. So what's the difference between the first half of the Seder and the second half of the Seder? So the first half focuses on the past. We want to recreate the energy of the past, but the second half of the Seder focuses on the future. So we're changing our focus from the liberation from evil. Egypt represents evil, but we're also preparing for the future when we will have complete, true and complete, this is an expression that's often used, true and complete redemption. What do we mean by true? This exodus from Egypt was not true. Of course it was true, but it wasn't lasting. True in the ultimate sense of the word means something that lasts, that doesn't get interrupted or isn't broken up. So the redemption from Egypt was not true in the truest sense of the word. And it wasn't complete because not everyone got out of Egypt. There were many Jews who refused to leave. Also, the redemption itself left a lot to be desired. The Jews still had a lot of their negativity, the way we discussed it last week. It wasn't a complete redemption. The final redemption that we pray for and we anticipate and that we celebrate the second half of the Seder about is the redemption that will be true. It means it will be eternal. It will never cease. It will never stop. And at the same time, it will be complete. It will take everyone out of this state of restriction, of confinement. And every aspect of our lives will be liberated. That's the hope and prayer that we all engage in, and that we try to taste a bit of that, or maybe more than just a bit of that, in the night of Passover, especially in the second half of the Seder. Where does the second half begin? So this, the first half, we drink 2 cups of wine, and then we eat the matzah, the bitter herbs. We eat a sandwich with matzah and bitter herbs. And then, at the end of the meal, we eat the Afikoman. Afikoman is most likely a Greek word, but it was used by the rabbis because it had also a translation in Aramaic, which was the language that people spoke in those days. What does the word Afikoman mean in Aramaic? Take out the food, bring out the food. What does that mean? At the beginning of the Seder, we took the middle matzah. There are 3 matzahs, and we take, and next week we'll talk more about the practical aspects of the Seder. We take the middle matzah at the very beginning, and we break it into 2. And we leave the smaller part, we leave sandwich in between those 2 matzahs that we will eat at the beginning of the meal. And then the larger part of the matzah, we put away. We hide, we put it away to be eaten at the end of the meal. That's the Afikoman. And what does it represent? According to most opinions, it represents the Paschal offering that we do not have in practice now because we don't have the temple, so we can't bring the Paschal lamb. But instead of eating the Paschal lamb at the end of the Seder, we eat that piece of matzah. And that represents the beginning of the second half of the Seder. So let's talk a little bit about the Afikoman. When you read the list of different items of the Seder, of the 15 items, the Afikoman is referred to by a different name, by the word Tzafun. Tzafun literally means north, or hidden, because the north was always seen as a symbol of God's presence being hidden more than it is in any other place of the world. Because relative to Israel, the north is where it gets colder and the sun doesn't shine as much. Also, there's a prophetic image that the north is the source of evil. Tzafon tipatach hara'ah. All the evil will come from the north. Now, in the prophets, it's referring specifically to Babylonia, to Iraq, which was the source of the destruction of the first temple. And it was predicted that the evil will come from the north. But in contemporary times, many people said it referred to Russia, to the Soviet Union, with north of most other places. That's where all the evil comes from. But the spiritual idea behind this is that the north is where it gets colder relative to where most people in this world live, in Israel itself. And that's the symbol of God's presence being concealed. But it's more than that. The Hebrew word Tzafon means concealed because there are 2 types of evil that we have to get rid of. There's the evil that is visible, that is apparent, that is not hidden at all, it's in your face. And that's much easier to deal with. It's easier to deal with an enemy that you know, an enemy that you could recognize. But then there's an elusive form of evil that's embedded very deeply in our psyche, and that even people who are good people, for some reason, they have this deep-rooted, deep-seated negative energy that they may never even experience. If they're lucky, it'll never materialize. It'll just be suppressed inside of their personality. But sometimes it might come out viciously. And you sometimes ask the question, this person I always knew was a very nice person, a very decent person, and all of a sudden they behaved in a terrible way. Where did that come from? The answer could be they always had it, but it was covered up. It was concentrated and covered up with a big shell, and it never really materialized. But sometimes what happens is that there's a crack in the cover and this negative behavior materializes. That type of evil we don't get rid of in the first part of the Seder. But in the second part of the Seder, we are given the power to dig deep inside our personality to eradicate even that concealed evil. There's a story in the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the greatest sage of his time. He saved the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple by sparing the sages, the ones who would promote and teach Torah, who were not massacred by the general of Rome, whose name was Vespasian, and Titus, who later on became the emperors of Rome. They granted Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai the wish that he had that the rabbis of Yavna should not be executed. And as a result, Judaism was able to continue. If they would have been gone, that would have been the end of Judaism the way we know it, because they were the ones who were teaching Judaism. Then everything was oral. At any rate, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of the most righteous people that ever lived. He devoted his whole life to doing good for others, saving the Jewish people. And on his deathbed, and he died at the ripe old age of 120. He's among 4 different sages who died at the age of 120. Hallel was another one. Rabbi Akiva was another one. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was crying on his deathbed. So his students asked him, "What are you crying? Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I don't know where I'm going." In other words, I might have to be going to Gehenna, to the spiritual cleansing process of the soul. And the funny thing is, and the question is asked, of all people, why was he so concerned about his future? We don't find any of the other great people crying on their deathbed because they didn't know where they're going. What was it about him that made him so concerned about his future in the next world? And the Rebbe gives the answer that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was so busy doing good, so busy managing crises, so busy devoting his life to the needs of others, that he never had a chance to think about himself, to introspect. We have the leisure, we have the luxury that we could spend time, if we're spending time on leisurely things, we could spend time on introspecting, digging deep into our own personalities, looking for whatever needs to be corrected. This Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai never focused on himself because he didn't have the luxury to do so. So on his deathbed, the first moment he had, you know what, I don't know who I am. Maybe there's some hidden evil deep down, somehow embedded in my psyche, that I never really had an opportunity to recognize, and certainly not to deal with and try to eradicate it. So I'm in trouble. I might not be going in the good place because I need to be cleansed. The other great rabbis never had that need to do that because they had the leisure to be introspective. And they knew if they had any negative hidden, embedded in deeply inside of them, they knew how to deal with it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai never knew how to deal with it. Well, every one of us, we have to consider the fact that we all have possibly hidden negative traits, and that on the night of Passover, especially in the second half of the Seder, we have the opportunity to expunge those negative forces. The Rebbe also told us many times that we're living on the cusp of the Messianic age. And that's why we see a phenomenon, the Rebbe said, that you see sometimes very good people, wonderful people, and all of a sudden they behave in disgusting ways. You can't understand, where did that come from? This person was such a nice person, and they just behave in a very unbecoming way. Where did that come from? So the Rebbe said, because we're right before the Messianic age, everything in all hidden matters are becoming revealed. Everything that's heretofore covered up is becoming exposed. And conversely, the Rebbe said, you find some average people, ordinary people, simple people, behaving in magnificent ways, in incredibly positive ways that you never knew they had that potential. There are people who you thought were just very limited, and they do things that are so incredible, so fantastic. Where did that come from? And the answer is, we all have hidden resources and hidden talents that we never experience. The famous analogy is of people in a time of crisis are able to lift up heavy loads that are 10 times their weight to save a life. Where did that come from? It comes from a part of their being. It's not a miracle. It's part of their nature, but it doesn't have to ever express itself because there's no crisis. When there's crisis, it comes to the fore. So this is what happens before the Messianic age. We're discovering hidden negative forces and hidden positive forces. If you discover you have this hidden negative force, if you ask yourself a question, why did I do something so horrible? It's not me. It's not who I am. That's a sign that God's giving you an opportunity to deal with it, to expunge it, to eradicate it, and thereby remove the impediments for the final redemption. Let's go back to Genesis. Jacob appropriates the blessings that Isaac had in mind to give to Esau. And when Esau shows up, the background of the story is Isaac calls in his son Esau, and he says, I want to bless you before I die. Go out and hunt and bring me some venison, and I will eat it, and I will bless you. And Rebecca, Isaac's wife, overhears this, and she tells her son Jacob, you better get the blessings. So she disguises him as Esau, who was very furry and very hairy, and she prepares a meal, a tasty meal, and he feeds it to his father, Isaac. And after he gets all the blessings, all the wonderful blessings, Esau shows up and he says, what happened over here? So Isaac says, your brother took the blessings, and it uses a term, bemirma, with guile, with wisdom. He outwitted you. So there's an interesting commentary that says that the Hebrew word bemirma has the same numerical value as the word Afikoman. And what does that mean? The food that she was serving, Rebecca was serving, that was the night of Passover, and the patriarchs kept Passover in their own way even before it existed, because they were exposed to the teachings of the Torah, and the food that she prepared was like the Paschal lamb. And there's a law that you can't eat anything after you eat the Passover lamb. And likewise, we can't eat anything after the Afikoman. So make sure at the meal that you eat your fill, because you can't eat any more after the last piece of matzah. So that was the clever trick. The trick was he fed him the Afikoman, so now he can't eat your venison because it's already too late. It's after the Afikoman. What that tells us conceptually is that the Afikoman is what gives us the power to outwit the Esavs of the world. Esav is always used as a symbol of evil. He was the progenitor of the Romans who destroyed the Second Temple. And throughout the prophets, the Edomites, as they're called, Esau's descendants, are the source of all the trouble that we're having since the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. And the worst part of Edom is the descendant called Amalek, the ones who want to commit genocide against the Jewish people. So we outwitted the Esavs, starting already back then, thousands of years ago. And that the Afikoman is the symbol of our ability to overcome all the forces of evil, even the hidden forces of evil. So that's the Afikoman. That's the last thing we're going to eat the night of the Seder, after which we say the grace after meals, and after which we pour the cup of wine called the cup of Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah. If your name is Eliyahu, it doesn't mean you can drink it. I'm sorry. It's for Elijah the prophet. What is the significance of this cup? This is the fifth cup of the Seder. We drink 4 cups because there were 4 expressions of redemption. But there's actually a 5th expression of redemption. The 5th expression is, you will be brought to this land. Yes, we're out of Egypt, and we're now free, but there's a 5th expression that we have to be brought into the promised land. That didn't happen yet. Because, yes, we have access to Israel, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about coming into the land of Israel. We're talking about a land of Israel, number one, that's run totally in accordance with the teachings of the Torah. We're talking about a land of Israel which doesn't have enemies surrounding it that want it destroyed. So that is still elusive. That still hasn't happened. But who will announce the coming of Mashiach? When that will happen, Elijah the prophet. Yes.
Wasn't when Hashem gave that 5th statement, wasn't it in much way his purpose to let Moses and all the 600,000 Jews know that you're being given this land, because he says in the 5th statement, as I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he's letting them know their heritage and the promise, and that's why they're getting it, because of their ancestors, the continuation of the religion.
Right. So what's the question?
I'm making a statement. I'm making a statement. Wasn't that a main reason why he's telling the Jews, why he's giving Moses this statement?
Okay, that's true, but it could be that if the Jews say, why do we need to go to that land? There's no oil there. Take us to Saudi Arabia. So God says, I promised the patriarchs, I'm going to take you to this land. I have to keep my promise. In other words, whether the Jews want to go there or not, they have to go there. Sometimes people don't want to go all the way. Sometimes people are happy going halfway in terms of their spiritual development, in terms of their physical development. So a lot of people stop at a certain point and say, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to change my life to do things that I'm not accustomed to. So God says, no, you have no choice. This is what I promised.
And this is his intention. He's telling them exactly what you're saying. This is his intention to say to them, what I want from you is not for you to stop. I want you going, and I want you to teach your children this.
Right, that's true. And also on a little bit deeper level, God is saying this going to the promised land is not just a nice place to go to, but it's going to be the place where you're going to see the fulfillment of everything that I promised the patriarchs. That this will bring to fruition all of the spiritual promises that I made to them, that this will be a land that will bring them closer to God, which was what the patriarchs were all about. They were the ones who discovered one God and devoted their lives to promoting that. And this will come to fruition when they come to the promised land. But since it didn't happen, some commentators say we don't drink the fifth cup because, number one, it's still elusive, the fulfillment of this promise. And number two, the fifth cup is qualitatively detached from the other four cups. It's at a much higher level because the four cups mostly focus on the past. And the past has its limits. The past has its flaws. The past has its compromises. The future will be complete, as I said before, will be true and complete. So that's why the fifth cup, the one that's associated with Elijah the prophet, the one that's associated with the future, is in a separate category. And that's why we don't drink it to separate it from the others.
Rabbi?
Yes.
What do we do with it?
We pour it back in the bottle. Yeah.
But, excuse me, but when we start to celebrate Pesach, and big cup of wine and something, it's okay. But in our time when we after that wine, you have to drive car.
Ideally, and more than ideally, we don't drive on Yantiv, but if you have a problem with alcohol, let's put it in a different context. If you have a problem with consuming alcohol for whatever reason, medical reason, you could use grape juice. So if you can't, let's say, use grape juice, let's say a diabetic can't use grape juice, you could use other beverages that are not chametz. You can't use vodka made out of grain. And drinking 4 cups of vodka is not advisable. Or Shlivovitz. Okay. I wouldn't use that in my car.
Might give it some trouble.
So the fifth cup is detached from the other 4 cups because the future is detached. In what way? On one hand, everything we do today is a preparation for the future. We're saving for the future. We're generating the spiritual energy that we're going to experience and internalize in the future. But the Talmud says something very strange about the coming of Mashiach. It says Mashiach will come when we are distracted from it, which is strange because we're supposed to pray for it every day. So how can you be distracted from something that you're praying for and you're focusing your mind on? So the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, says it doesn't mean distracted in that you forget about it. The Hebrew word is hesach hadas. It's when you go beyond das, when you go beyond knowledge, which means that you realize that whatever we're going to experience in the future is greater than anything that we could imagine. It's beyond our understanding. Whatever level of understanding we have, it'll surpass that, it'll transcend that. And that's why the fifth cup is connected to the future. It's beyond our knowledge, and we can't drinking. Drinking is a symbol of internalizing it, and we cannot internalize it right now because it's going to be way beyond us. Also, the fifth cup corresponds to the fifth level of the soul. The Kabbalists tell us, and it's also in the Midrash, that we have 5 levels to our soul. We're not going to go into the 5 levels right now, but the fifth level is called the Yechida, the soul, part of the soul that's one with God, and it's the most essential component of the soul. That is what's revealed through the fifth cup of Elijah, and because it's so transcendent, we don't drink it right now. When Mashiach comes, we'll probably drink the fifth cup. So what do? After we pour the cup for Elijah, we open the door for him. Now, he doesn't need for us to physically open the door because he doesn't come in his body. He comes with his soul, because if he came with his body, by the time the night is over, he'd be so drunk, drinking from every cup of Eliyahu, that he would have been arrested long time ago. So it's obvious that he doesn't actually drink the wine because he doesn't come in his body, he comes in his soul. And he could be at a million places at the same time. If he can do that, he doesn't need a door open in order for him to enter. So it's metaphorical. When we open the door, we're saying that we are ready for Elijah to come in. And we have faith in God's promise that he will come to announce the coming of Mashiach. And if we open our doors and we're saying we're receptive, then God opens up his gates to allow his energy to emerge and to take us out of exile. And that's why there's a custom that on the night of Passover, we do not lock our doors to the outside. Because the simple reason is because in the Torah, the night of Passover is described as Leil Shimurim, a night of protection. This was when God protected the Jews from the 10th plague. But even today, it's a time when we're protected. Just don't announce it to all the thieves that your doors are open. That's foolhardy to do that, but you don't have to worry about being broken into on the night of Passover. You leave your doors open. Yes?
Does this have anything to do with at the beginning of the Seder? I think you said last week it starts off like inviting people to come to the Seder?
Right, so this is another invitation for Elijah. So, yes, it is an invitation. You're asking Elijah to come in. You're asking Elijah, not just Elijah the person, the prophet. You're talking about the energy of Elijah to enter into your home, into your lives, which is much more than what you had in the first part of the Seder. I remember I had the privilege of being present at the Rebbe Seder a few times. And it was interesting how the first half of the Seder, the Rebbe's reciting of the Haggadah was more casual, was more relaxed. The second half of the Seder, the Rebbe's face turned red, and the intensity was incredible. It was palpable. You could see the spiritual energy was being transmitted. Then we say something that some people find uncomfortable. When the door is open for Elijah, we say the words, "Pour your wrath on the nations who don't know you." In other words, get rid of all these evil nations of the world who terrorize the Jewish people and who do not know God. And the reason why we say that is because one of the last things that will happen before the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, will be rebuilt, is that Mashiach will lead the Jewish people in the battles against all those enemies who prevent us from doing what we have to do. And I believe that what's happening today with the wars against Hamas and the wars against Hezbollah is a manifestation of that war to get rid of the final vestiges of evil. And if you ask the question, why are we witnessing such? 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, you didn't hear people, college students and professors, espousing a genocide, wiping out every single Jew in the world. That's what they're saying, and they mean what they're saying. The biggest mistake Jews make is when they don't believe their enemies. People didn't believe Hitler. People didn't believe the other tyrants of the world, because they said, nah, it couldn't be possible that this person really means what he's saying. It's just rhetoric. It doesn't have any real meaning. No, they do mean what they say. If they have the ability, they would do it. And this is talking about professors in universities. I would close down every university to get rid of those evil people. But that's the Mashiach's final battle, to get rid of all the evil. The last vestiges of evil are coming out. All the hidden evil is coming out. It's not hiding anymore. Because it didn't happen overnight. It was revealed overnight, but it was always there, lurking, always there beneath the surface. Now, what's interesting that it uses the singular form when it talks about how they're campaigning against the Jewish people. It uses the singular. Although it starts off with the plural, pour your wrath on the nations, plural, and then it reverts to using the singular. So the commentaries explain there are many nations in the world, and they don't get along with each other. Iraq and Iran didn't like each other. Now Iran controls Iraq to a great extent. The Shiites and the Sunnis don't like each other. They would kill each other. The Christians and the Muslims don't exactly get along. There's tremendous amount of division in the world amongst the nations of the world. But you know when they unite? Against the Jews. All of a sudden, Iran was supporting Hamas. Hamas is the ultimate Sunni fanatic. And the Shiites, the fanatical Shiites, are the Iranians. And yet they're getting along and they're giving them billions of dollars of support. Because to go against the Jews, they become unified. That's the only reason that unifies them. So that's why it changes from the plural to the singular. But it says, why do we want God to pour out his wrath on them? Of course, we hope and pray that the evil, this is one of the major distinctions between Judaism and other religions that militate against their enemies. Our greatest hope is that our enemies turn into friends, cease being enemies. It's only ones that are incorrigible. They can't be rectified. It can't be changed. Then they have to be eliminated. Tragically, we're not happy with that. That's one of the reasons given why we pour out some of the wine in the beginning of the Seder. We pour out, when we mention the 10 plagues, we pour out a little droplets of wine. So, because wine is the symbol of joy, and even though we're happy that God spared us from the Egyptians who tormented us, who enslaved us, who tortured us, we're not so happy because we would rather we wouldn't have to see their destruction. We rather would want them to have changed their attitudes and become friends instead of being enemies. Yes?
Rabbi, is that the same kind of a reason why God had the ark made, because he felt that he couldn't convert he couldn't convert because he could do anything, but out of his way that you have to voluntarily do it in your own will? Is that why God had the ark made and had all the people destroyed rather than rehabilitated?
No, he would have wanted them to be rehabilitated. That's why he told Noah to build the ark. And Noah was not a professional ark builder, so it would take him very long to do. And that, meanwhile, he would be able to encourage the people to change. So God always gives you an option to change. And only when you reach the bottom and you show no interest in developing a different attitude, only then does God have the need to bring about the end of those people. But nevertheless, unfortunately, there are people who are so evil that there's very little chance that they're going to change. But what does God hold against them? Not just they persecute us, they don't know God. Because the ultimate goal is not just for the Jewish people to know God. Yes, the Jewish people were given special exposure to the knowledge of God, but our goal and our objective is that the whole world will be consumed with this awareness of God's presence, the das, the knowledge of God. As it says in Isaiah, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the sea is covered with water. God wants everyone. And we're living in a time where the projection is that within 5 or 10 years or whatever number of years, human beings will have nothing else to do with their lives. Because everything will be automated with AI, with robots. You're not going to have to do anything, not a stitch of work. So what are we going to do all the time? You'll be bored. You'll be bored.
Make you.
So they were going to be doing creative, spiritually creative things, not physical things. We won't have to do them. And that ties in with what Maimonides writes at the very last paragraph of his massive work of Jewish law, that in that time there will be, the only preoccupation of the world will be to know God. Yes, we'll know God through playing violin, through music. It'll all be geared to that one experience, which is going to be the most enjoyable experience. To us right now, that doesn't sound like very enjoyable. You don't see people flocking in the synagogues because they want to know God, but that will happen when Mashiach comes. But that's the point. God is upset that the nations of the world do not exhibit any interest in knowing God, because they wouldn't be fighting to destroy the Jewish people. Then, after we open the door for Elijah, and we say this paragraph, we continue with what is called Hallel. Hallel is a collection of psalms that we recite every holiday, thanking God, praising God for the miracles. At the night of the Seder, the Hallel is divided into two parts. There's the part before the meal, and there's the part after the meal, that reflect the two different components, the two different dimensions of the Seder. The part before the meal focuses on the exodus from Egypt, and the part after the meal focuses on the future. Now, what's the reason why we say praises to God? We praise God. Is God human, that he needs our praises? We need positive reinforcement. If you see a kid who has a potential and you praise the kid, that'll help the kid become a better student, or whatever trait you want the kid to develop, by positive reinforcement. But God doesn't need positive reinforcement, of course. So why do we praise God? What is the reason for that? So there are two explanations given. Maimonides has one explanation, and Chassidic thought has a deeper explanation. Maimonides' explanation is, and many others who say the same thing, is that the Psalms of praise of God is not because God needs our praise. We need it. We have to be aware of God's greatness, of God's love, and of God's connection to us. God doesn't need it, but we need it. So by praising God, it alerts us to the reality of what we get from God. That's the first part of the Seder. The first part of the Seder is we need to be cognizant of God's love for us and what he did for us, and not take it for granted, because our lives, if you think about it, our lives are filled with miracles. Just walking down the street could sometimes be a miracle that you weren't hurt. There was just a tragedy in Brooklyn. A Jewish woman with 2 children were just mowed down by a car in some type of a freak accident, I think. You're walking down the street, you think it's the safest thing to do, and who knows if you'll survive it. So the fact that we can even cross the street or go down the street is a miracle. And there are other miracles that we're not even aware of. As they happen, we weren't even aware there was a threat. So we have to recognize those miracles, and that's why we sing praises to God. The second part of the Seder focuses on another dimension of saying praise. Just like when you say praise to someone, let's say a child has a potential to be a better student, but doesn't really work very hard, is lazy, and when you praise the child, what happens? Their hidden talent starts to express itself. It aids with expression. The same thing is true with God's talents, God's love, God's kindness, God's compassion could be covered up, could be concealed. By praising God, we cause that potential to be revealed. The Hebrew word Hallel is related to another Hebrew word in the book of Job, which means to radiate light. Behilo. It could be the English word halo, comes from that Hebrew source. Hallel, halo, Hillel, these are all related to the word light. Hillel was much more about bringing light into the world, focusing on the positive. Shammai was more focused on the being judgmental and rigid. So when you say Hallel, the second part of Hallel, the focus is on bringing God's light, hidden light, into the open. Now, the 15th item of the Seder is called Nirtzah. Nirtzah means accepted. God happily accepted what we did at the Seder. What does that mean? So in Chassidic philosophy, this is a deep concept, but I'll try to explain it. There are 3 stages in the way God relates to us. The first stage is called an arousal from above. What does that mean? We're groping in the dark. We're leading our lives in a routine way without any inspiration. And what happens? All of a sudden, we wake up one morning, or we're walking down the street or whatever, and we feel inspired. That means that God has created and initiated an arousal, an inspiration from above. We didn't prepare for it, we didn't work on it, we didn't do anything to earn it, but God in His infinite kindness sometimes inspires us. What are we supposed to do? So we're told immediately we should create our own inspiration. Use that as a message from on high that we have to inspire ourselves and create our own inspiration. Because there's something to be said about what we do over what God does for us. Because what God does for us doesn't necessarily change us. Of course, God could change everything in an instant if He wanted to, but He doesn't want to do it. He wants us to change ourselves. But we're not working, we're not doing it. So what does God do? He inspires us, and that awakens us. And once we're awakened, we can just say, oh, that felt great, that inspiration, and go back to what we were doing before and forgetting about it, and then nothing will happen because you weren't prepared. What the person is supposed to do later is to do what is called an arousal from below, to start arousing yourself and inspiring yourself by doing something concrete, doing a mitzvah that you weren't planning on doing, and saying, look, I got inspired, let me do something good, let me just help someone, let me do whatever mitzvah it is. That's the second stage. Then what's the third stage? The third stage is that God reciprocates in an arousal from above that is infinitely higher than the original arousal from above and your own arousal. And you can't generate that light. But then why do you need the arousal from above and arousal from below to precede it? Because God will not allow His light to express itself unless it's a complete platform. If the platform is, I'll use an analogy, a country is in need of aid from another country. They just went through an earthquake, as it just happened the other day in Thailand and Burma. And you want to fly in supplies, but the place is just so broken that the plane can't land. And finally, the plane finds some level ground where it could land. What are people going to say? That who helped them? The level ground helped them? No, the level ground doesn't help people. It's the plane load with supplies that helps them. But the plane load of supplies couldn't get to them unless there was level ground. The same thing is true that sometimes God wants to give us something, but He says, I can't give it to you because the ground is not level. It's not receptive. You're not receptive. It's not a whole. It's a broken piece of earth. So what do? We take advantage of an inspiration from above, then when we reciprocate with our inspiration from below, and then God says, oh, the ground is now level. I will give you something that you could never have achieved on your own through your own efforts. I'll give you something much higher. That's what the word nirtza means. That God says after you did the whole Seder, you took advantage of the inspiration from above, because that's what happens on Passover. We're all inspired. And then we reciprocate by doing our part. And then God says, you know what? Now I'm ready to give you something much higher, because the ground is now level ground. It's now safe for me to land something much higher. Some commentators point out that the word nirtza, which means accepted, has the same numerical value as Moses. What is the significance of that? So, what I think, this is my personal feeling, is that many people have pointed out that the whole Haggadah doesn't mention Moses except one time in passing. It wasn't Moses the hero. It's like reading the Megillah, the story of Purim, without mentioning Esther. If you don't mention Esther, there's no story. Without mentioning Mordechai, there's no story. Yet the whole Haggadah, which is about the Exodus from Egypt, where Moshe was the main performer, he was the main, he was the protagonist. And yet, no mention. Okay, one time it's mentioned in the context of a verse which says that the people believed in God and Moses his servant. But that's it. Not about Moses doing the 10 plagues and Moses splitting the sea. All of that which Moses did is absent. So some people say that it didn't want to detract from God's role. If we would talk about Moses, people would have started glorifying Moses and forget about God. That's a very weak explanation, because then we shouldn't be reading the Torah altogether, because the Torah glorifies Moses. The Torah says how great he was. He was the greatest prophet, the most humble man who spoke to God face to face. But if you look in Maimonides' description of the Seder, I think I mentioned this in a class not too long ago, Maimonides says that there are two audiences for the Seder. One audience is a child or a tipesh. A tipesh is, how would you translate, a fool, a very low IQ person.
Simpleton.
More than a simpleton. One level beneath a simpleton. Right. If you're dealing with a simpleton or someone a little less than a simpleton, you tell them, you see this servant over here, the maid working in the house? That's what we were, and God liberated us. Period. That's the end of the story. Don't tell him anything more. You'll confuse him. Just be very direct and don't elaborate. No mention of Moses. Just we were slaves and we were free. But if you're dealing with a chacham, a wise child, someone who's mature, tell them about all the miracles and tell them about Moses, what Moses did, and elaborate on that. So what is Maimonides trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us that, yes, there are some people, simpletons, who will get confused if you focus too much on Moses, a human being, because Moses was 100% human, no miraculous birth. And Moses was 100% human, and you're going to focus on him. People will think that Moses had his own power to do these things. He was a magician. He was some type of a sorcerer. And you forget about God, that everything that Moses did was God doing it through Moses. But if you're more sophisticated, you realize that Moses' whole existence was that he was a transparent communicator of God's power. Moses was great not because he was smart, but Moses was great because he was so humble that he had no ego to color and distort the message that was coming from God. So someone who's more sophisticated knows that, yes, Moses is the hero of Passover. Because when you say Moses is the hero, you're not taking away from God. God is channeling everything through Moses. And to the extent that we are humble and we are self-effacing, we can do we have a little bit of Moses in us. The Tanya says every one of us has a spark of Moses in him or her. So that's why it could be the last word, the last item of the Seder is Nirtzah, has the numerical value of Moses to tell us that sometimes Moses has to be concealed in a hint. But we should know that it's Moses who is really the hero of the whole Seder. And then we conclude with the words next year in Jerusalem, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. That's said twice a year. You could say it every day, but it's said officially twice a year at the end of the Seder and the end of Yom Kippur. Why is it recited these two times? By the way, it doesn't mean you have to wait a year to be in Jerusalem. When it says next year, it means that we'll be in Jerusalem today or tomorrow, and by the time next year rolls around, we'll have already been in Jerusalem, because Mashiach doesn't have to wait until next year. But then why we do this twice a year? Because there's a dispute in the Talmud. Which month is the most opportune month for Mashiach to come, for the redemption to happen? One opinion says the month of Tishrei, the month in which we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the other one says no, the month of Nisan, the same month in which we had the first Exodus, we'll have the final one. Doesn't mean he can't come any other time, it just means these are the most opportune months. So that's why in these 2 months we focus on next year in Jerusalem. Now, many people have a custom, yes?
Oh, sorry, Rebbe. So
Sure.
what do people in Jerusalem say?
They say this, they probably add the word Habenuyah, the rebuilt Jerusalem, which means with the temple rebuilt. And even if they don't add that word, that's what they mean. Because we're not happy just with having Jerusalem under our control, since it's being contested viciously. And people make a big mistake. If Israel thinks it's going to make compromises and territorial compromises, but we'll just keep Jerusalem, that'll placate the enemy. No. Even if they had a choice of keeping Jerusalem and giving up everything else, they would say, we'll give everything. We want Jerusalem. They want the prize more than anything else. And we also want it. So, many people at the end of the Seder sing a lot of hymns. One of the hymns is going by the numbers of the 1 to 13. Who knows 1? 1 is God in heaven and earth. Who knows 2? The 2 tablets. Who knows 3? The patriarchs, and so on, till number 13. There's a hymn that people sing, and then there's another hymn called Chad Gadya, about the one goat that his father bought, and a cat came and ate the goat, and the dog came and bit the cat, and the stick came and hit the dog, and the fire came and burnt the stick. It goes on until it ends with God killed the angel of death. And this is a very enigmatic hymn, and there are many explanations what it means, but we'll leave that for another time. But at the end of the Seder, many people, actually in most communities, they say another hymn to the words Chasal Seder Pesach. The end. This is the end of the order of Passover. In other words, we concluded the Seder. Chabad custom is not to say that, and the reason given by the previous Rebbe is that Passover never ends. The idea of redemption has to be a perpetual one. It's not something that occurs only during Passover and then peters out afterwards and you have to wait another year. It's continuous. And since it's continuous, how could you say it ended? On the contrary, it never ends. Those who say it, that's the most prevalent custom. But this class has come closer to the end. Anyone has any questions? Yes.
Are there any Ashkenazi communities that do not hide the Afikoman? As among the Spartan, there are many other traditions that I think are much more interesting.
They have a whole ceremony with it.
Walk outside and encircle the
Right.
house.
We hide the Afikoman. That's why it's called Tzafun, the hidden.
Right.
When we explained that the hiding is a spiritual thing because we're dealing with a hidden evil.
No,
But
a
our
Turkish Seder where they actually wear the Afikoman.
Oh, yes.
The person, they tuck it in and they wear it. They pass it from person to person.
Right, and it's also a custom in many communities where the children try to grab the Afikoman and steal it and bribe and use it as extortion from their father or mother to get a gift.
It's become more and more disgusting in America.
Well, Chabad does not like that custom because there's this expression in the Talmud. There's a story in the Talmud about a certain rabbi who was a very wealthy man, and all of us he owned a wine factory, and all his wine turned into vinegar. So the rabbis came to him and they said, you should start introspecting. Maybe this is a punishment for you. He says, what do you mean punishment? What did I do wrong? If you did anything wrong, tell me. He says, you have a sharecropper, someone who would harvest the grapes and gets a percentage, and you didn't give him a percentage of the branches. You only gave him the percentage of the grapes. He says, what do you mean? The guy steals everything from me. So why should I give him something extra when he steals? So the rabbis told him, no, that's not an excuse, because if you steal from a thief, you taste this taste of stealing. Mm-hmm. In other words, not only does Judaism doesn't want you to steal when it's not permitted, even if you can find some type of a justification for it, engaging in an act of stealing has a negative effect on you. And that's why Chabad's custom is not to have the children steal the Afikoman, because even though it's done in jest and in fun, and it's there to keep the children from falling asleep, because that's one of the things that you're supposed to do is keep the children awake if possible. But it's still, you taste a little bit what it means to be a thief, and you don't want that to inculcate that in children.
Another question is, in general, in fact, I can't think of any other cases where we do it, why do we divide the Hallel and have half of it for the meal?
That's what I explained. The first part of Hallel mentions the Exodus. It's the focus on the past. The second part of Hallel is praises of God to bring about the future. So that's the Jerusalem Talmud says that actually, that the first part of,
We do it on Pesach, right? I mean, there's
because Passover is about Exodus.
The only time we do it is the Seder.
Right, because the whole idea of Passover is the Exodus, but there's a past Exodus and there's a future Exodus, so we divide it up into two parts. Actually, we're also told that Passover is 8 days. In Israel, it's 7 days. The first 2 days and the last 2 days. The first 2 days, the focus is on the past, and the last 2 days, the focus is on the future. So we divide up a lot of things like that. We never forget the past, and we don't just live in the past, we also focus on the future. Yes?
In Judaism, we're waiting for the Mashiach to come, right? And I was wondering how the Judaism views other less radical and extremist religions such as Buddhism, Hindu. So meaning that it's only, according to the internet, it's only 0.2% of Jews on the whole planet. And there are other religions, how we are looking at the other religions.
Okay, that's that. I need a whole class for that. I'll just share with you an incident that happened with me, a personal anecdote. I was once invited to give a talk at a group of Muslims. These Ahmadiyan Muslims. They're pro-Israel. They're not militants in any way. I thought I would be the only speaker because I don't like to be on an interfaith panel because then you're competing with others, and that's not what I'm here for, to compete. So anyhow, but it was a panel. They had everyone speak, and then after everyone spoke, they threw one question at each member of the panel. There was a Muslim, there was an imam, there was a Buddhist, there was a Hindu, there was a Christian, and I'm the Jew. And they asked each one, I was the last one to be asked, what do you think about other religions? They asked you a question, and they were all lying through their teeth. Because they were all saying that, well, we think there are many paths to God and they're all right. And I'm going to be the last one. I didn't want to sound disrespectful to them, but I wasn't going to lie to them. So I said, 3 is not 1. And I said, to the extent that your religion conforms to the 7 Noahide commandments, then it's fine. If it doesn't, it's not fine. Let them figure out themselves if their religion conforms to it. So I wasn't insulting them, but if they were honest and they would look into it, they would discover that many aspects of their religion is not consistent with the 7 Noahide. And the 7 Noahide commandments are the commandments given to Noah, to humanity. And if you follow those 7, then fine, you're a good person. Maimonides says you have a share in the next world. You're loved by God. But if you don't, then we're not going to be ecumenical and say, well, we embrace every religion as long as a religion. Now, every religion has parts of it that are certainly positive, most of which took it from Judaism, especially in Christianity and Islam. But there's a lot of information and practices that are totally contrary to Judaism and totally contrary to the 7 Noahide commandments. So that'll be my answer. But maybe another class we'll be able to go into more deeply.
I have a question for you. When you mentioned the 600,000, okay, is that Rak Yehudim or?
The 600,000 left Egypt?
Right.
Yes, it is.
Or does that include Yehudim and Lo Yehudim?
No, just Jews, just
Okay.
Jewish men
When you include everybody else that went with them,
we don't know how many there were.
but there were.
There were others who joined the Jews then.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, God willing, next week we'll be talking about the practical aspects of the Seder to give you a little bit of an idea what has to be done. Because in Judaism, the theories are great and wonderful, but it's the action that counts mostly.